This is Tabletop Babble, and I'm Amber.
And I'm Kenny.
Today on the show, Kenny and I talk with game master and comedian Shawn O'Hara, who we're both major fans of. He's been an inspiration and influence on both of our own GMing. We sat down on November 4th and chatted about his actual play podcast, table dynamics, doing voices and accents, improv and RPGs, and media that inspires our game design. Hello, Shawn. Thank you so much for coming on the show to talk with me and Kenny. Would you please tell us who you are and what you do in the RPG space?
Yeah, of course. My name is Shawn O'Hara, and I am the game master for an actual play podcast called Spout Lore.
One of my favorite actual plays. I'm serious.
Thank you. That's very sweet.
So Spout Lore, when did it start? When did you guys start making this show?
It's been out for 3 years, I think. I think October 24th is the day that it started because that's Jessica's birthday. And so that would have been 3 years, and we recorded about a year before we released. So 2016.
Wow, you recorded a whole year before you started releasing podcasts?
Yeah, we really built up a backlog before we started that now we are desperately trying to maintain.
I was gonna say, that sounds so proactive, and I am like impressed, but now, okay, we're on the same level.
Yeah, as a fellow like content maker, like how far back does that backlog go now? Like, how much is in the tank?
As of right now, November, whatever it is, 4th, I think we're good until early January. And that is purely because of the incredible work ethic of Abdulaziz, who is an unbelievably committed and skilled editor. And we dropped, because we were initially releasing every week, which was great because it was good to like build an audience early on, but it's absolute with the level of quality that Abdul expects from like a finished edited episode, it's absolutely untenable. Like it would have to be his full-time job.
Yeah, I'm experiencing that now where it's like, oh, I committed myself to releasing a podcast once a week, and that is just so much to do. I'm a fan of the bi-weekly. So are you bi-weekly now?
Yeah, we're bi-weekly. Because when we started, everybody lived in the same city. And since Abdul has moved to Vancouver, British Columbia from Victoria, where Jessica and I live, and Paul. But Paul lived in the woods for a while. So how we've been doing it for the last couple of years is every once in a while, with COVID, we're doing like, we'll social distance, we'll isolate for 2 weeks before, but we get together for between 2 and 5 days and have like a little retreat and just record as much as we can.
That's awesome. I love this because it's like now we get to see the behind the scenes of Spout Lore, which is freaky for two fans.
Yeah, I'm just imagining Paul in the woods, like cosplaying Ving in the frozen north.
Basically.
Speaking of Ving, we've talked about Abdul, we've talked about Jessica. You have this actual play called Spout Lore. I want to challenge you, Shawn O'Hara, to succinctly tell our listeners who may not have listened to your show, what is this show about? Like, what is the pitch of this world?
Okay, I can do this. I can absolutely. And my stupid media-soaked brain is just trying to think of the things to combine. So it's sort of like, it's like Lord of the Rings if those responsibilities were placed upon the shoulders of the cast of Adventure Time. And another thing that I always think of is it's like 3 men and a baby, except minus one man, and the baby is ancient. And also there's swords occasionally.
That's an accurate and succinct description, I think. I couldn't have described it better, honestly.
That's the mashup.
It's been hard for me to describe to people because I've been like a comedian since 2012. I've been doing comedy, and my family knows that. And they also know that I have a podcast, but I don't think that they understand that it is a role-playing game podcast. So trying to explain what my podcast is about sucks every time.
What do you tell them?
Now I tell them, okay, because I'm sure that you've run into this. The easiest way to explain role-playing games to anybody that doesn't play is to just say Dungeons and Dragons. It doesn't matter what you're actually playing. I tell them that it's a podcast where we record ourselves playing Dungeons and Dragons, and they're usually not interested enough to follow up with another question. So that ends the conversation at any dinner.
Although it is nice now that there is enough of a cultural touchstone that you can invoke Dungeons and Dragons and people will generally get what you're talking about.
Yeah, totally.
So speaking of recording yourselves playing Dungeons and Dragons, like what pushed you guys to decide to record and put it out there into the world?
I pushed them because I've been listening to actual play podcasts for a long time. I've been into role-playing games since like middle school. Didn't play at all in middle school because I didn't have any friends that wanted to play. And then in high school, I met a bunch of guys and we actually still play together, which eventually drove me to role-playing game podcasts because, and I could be wrong, the first one that I listened to was the Penny Arcade Acquisitions Incorporated game. And I think that might have been the first AP podcast I'm aware of. That might have been the first.
Bare minimum, that's definitely what caught fire and started the whole phenomenon of AP podcasting.
And then what really hooked me was the One Shot Network's One Shot podcast, just by exposing me to so many different kinds of role-playing game systems. And their specific podcast campaign, which I'm sure everybody's heard of, if not listened to, is like, at the time was one of the best and funniest role-playing game pieces of media I'd ever heard. And I really wanted to do that. Knowing as many performers and artists as I do, I thought that it wouldn't be too hard. It took place, I guess it would have been Christmas 2013 or 2014. There's a comedian in Victoria who hosts a Christmas party every year. That's sort of like the comedy community's unofficial like family Christmas party. And I mentioned that I really wanted to do a role-playing game podcast to our former editor, Wes. And he wanted it to happen enough that he was like, I will drive down from his home in Nanaimo whenever you need me to, because I want this to take place. And I was talking to Abdul, and I was talking to Wes and Jessica. And I was like, well, you guys have very different voices. That would be a good way to do that. And I was like, who else has a good but different voice? And I was like, oh, Paul. So we just did that. And they didn't have any prior experience in role-playing games, which was initially going to be it was definitely the impetus of the podcast, but it was supposed to be like a part of the concept when we started, that it was me leading them through their first ever role-playing game experience. But they took to it so quickly that it ended up not really being important.
If you start from episode 1 of Spout Lore and listen on, the journey, not just of the characters, but of the players in your group, is really fun to listen to.
Yeah, no, I've really enjoyed that aspect of it. Because Abdul and Paul, I met them doing comedy. Jessica, I've known since I was 11, and she is not a performer at all. She hates it. She's so mic shy and stage shy, but listening to the journey of all of them, especially Jessica, has, in my opinion, at least, has been like unbelievable, because now they're all improv pros. They're off the top of their heads just having conversations that like rip my heart out.
I was going to say, like, as a listener and a person who is also not naturally a performer and have pushed myself to do stuff, listening to Jessica's growth has really been inspiring to me, to see the kind of hesitation, reservation, but also having fun and going along with stuff, to the point where she is now the instigator of a lot of ridiculous things. Yeah. And I loved listening to that unfold.
Yeah. And I don't know if you've listened to any of the Blades in the Dark stuff, but if I had to say that there was a leader of the party in Spout Lore, it's very likely Tuck in my mind. But if there's a leader of the Cool Treat Kids in Mallrats, I think that it's Jessica's character, Clover. Like, she's just taken on this aggressively ambitious prepubescent girl persona. Like, she just fell right into it. And those characters are so different from the Spout Lore characters that it's just been an incredible experience. Which makes it sound like, I don't know, like I run a retreat in the mountains. Just a really incredible, our synergy, our life force is coming together. It's playing a game, there's dice and paper.
I was going to say, speaking of instigation, this gets me into something I wanted to ask you about. You mentioned Abdul, especially at the beginning of the series, but always, and all of your players really, they try to pull off and create the most absurd scenarios. And just listening, I put myself, of course, in the GM shoes, and I am just trying to think of how I would juggle these things. So my opening question to you on this is, how do you deal with the suggestions that these players are making to you? And maybe you could lead off with an example of something. Like, what has been some memorable, absurd thing that the players have tried to pull off or successfully pulled off?
Basically, the fact that they have never played role-playing games before Spout Lore means that they don't come at anything from the perspective of a player or somebody that's experienced with like fantasy fiction. So everything that they suggest is being pulled from their own experiences and preferences. For Jessica, it's folklore and fairy tales and like art and stuff like that. For Paul, it's like music and movies from the 80s and his actual genuine life as like a forager. And for Abdul, it seems to be teen comedies and, for the example of McCall, his life in a variety of Middle Eastern cities as a child. One of the examples that I always think of early on was when I asked them about the city that was nearby to Bulrush Village, because I was like, there's a city that's kind of close. Let's talk about that city. And they literally just started telling me about like the West Edmonton Mall in Canada. And I was like, okay, so now I have to come up for a reason for there to be malls in this city. And I don't know. I mean, in terms of actual actions, there's an episode in which Abdul's character Tuck decides to combat a malicious pile of moss by, we're saying PG-13, so just relieving himself in the most egregious fashion. And that's probably genuinely the most frustrated I've ever been with Abdul in the game.
In the game or as a man?
Maybe as a man, actually, as a human being that I work with. But the way that I always think of being a game master is, I know there are a lot of people who come into being a game master they have a story that they want to tell. They have a story that they want the characters to help them facilitate. As far as I have done it, I think that my goal number one is always 100% fun. I want people to be having a good time. That's what games are for, I think. And I think that there are a number of ways, if you're open and flexible, to tease the game the characters want to play out of them without them necessarily knowing that. The first time I read Dungeon World, it was the first time I'd ever read a game where the main piece of advice for game masters was ask questions and listen to the answers. Asking questions to your players is the secret to good game mastering. Game mastering? Mastering the games. Running games. That's the word.
Running games, mastering the game.
And that's the thing is when you put yourself in that directorial composer sort of role, you're not the master of the game. You are no longer the master. You're merely the person that runs between all of the players and attempts to make their questions useful. Does that answer the question? I don't think it does.
Well, no, I think it does answer the question.
It does.
I think because you played this game with a Powered by the Apocalypse game, which a lot of them do, and you play Blades in the Dark as well, those kinds of games do open you up to be like having to deal with these crazy suggestions.
Mm-hmm. Right, it was the suggestions.
Because you're going in with that mindset with that game, you kind of are preparing yourself for that because you know it's going to be a give and take.
Totally. Yes, that is a more succinct way of saying what I said. Which was a 10-minute answer to a question.
I was going to say, to paraphrase as well, like what I take away from what you're saying like in these suggestions that you're getting from your players when you ask these questions, you as the GM take this as an opportunity to learn what kind of game they want to play, what kind of story they want to tell.
Yeah, totally. Because, I mean, everybody has their own style, but if you want to try a more improvised style of game, I always think of like the inciting incident of a session, and then I have zero plans from then on out. And maybe it's my players specifically because they are coming at something from a perspective that isn't necessarily common in role-playing games. I don't know what they're going to decide to do or why they're going to decide to do it. So there's no point in planning. at least as far as I'm concerned. But I didn't think that early on. So like in the show, there is, if people have listened to it, you'll know what I'm talking about. There is a character who is like this mysterious gang leader who is pulling the strings in this muddy, crappy little town. And I had a character in mind for who that gang leader was going to be revealed to be. But the players became obsessed with an NPC that I had introduced for no reason, literally no reason. They just became obsessed with this one player. So then because they were so sure of themselves that that was the gang leader's identity, I made that character the gang leader because it would mean more to them once they confirmed that than it would if I was like, actually, no, it was this person you've never heard of. It's like, that is not as fun for them. So why not just let them subconsciously direct the session?
I think that is pretty great advice because I think every GM, this is memed on so often, GMs with the experience of you introduce just random whoever, they're like, who's this person sitting at the bar? I don't know, Joe Schmeckel. And they're like, what's up with Joe Schmeckel?
Yeah, what's his problem? And that is something that these guys have definitely done a lot over the years, is they ask me for an NPC's name, which I'm famously terrible at coming up with on the spot. I don't know why. I'm just bad at coming up with names. And then based on whatever stupid voice I give them, they will either become obsessed with them or they will hate them immediately. And either way, that means that they're going to interact with them a lot.
This is from my perspective, again, as somebody who really likes the podcast. I really like your voices, and I feel like you have a pretty definitive stable of voices that you are comfortable with. I love your proper gentleman voice has made a number of appearances in Spout Lore. So I just wanted to ask in general, like, do you have a stable of go-to voices? Do you practice voices at all? Are they all just like totally ephemeral? Do they come from comedy?
Yeah, I think that for the most part, as a person that has always made a lot of jokes for whatever trauma-based reason exists within me, I have spent a lot of time doing stupid voices or impressions, but I'm bad enough at impressions of actual people that I just tried to do like different accents, and that transformed into a lot of stuff. So when I choose a voice for an NPC in Spout Lore, I think there's a lot of stereotypical instincts. I try not to, absolutely, but like if I want a character that is a fancy person, I will very often do a fancy British accent because that's what comes to my mind first. But usually the first voice that I do is like the crystal of the NPC, and then hopefully once I realize that I've made the same stereotypical choice I always make, I will transform it into something else. I think a lot of people are not careful with the accents that they do in role-playing games, and I think that can be a dangerous road to walk down. We had a conversation before we started recording season 7 of Spout Lore, which takes place primarily in McCall, a city of fantasy Egyptian creation created by Abdul. Like that's a different situation than if I were to roll in and start doing Arabic NPCs and doing Arabic accents. So the conversation that we had before we started is that I will not be doing any Arabic accents. Like that's just not going to happen. So like we have dwarves who more kind of have like a Dracula kind of voice, which is like stupid enough. I don't think it's going to make any Draculas mad.
It is very interesting. I feel like it's strange because there are certain accents that for whatever reason you have free reign to do and to butcher, and it's fine. I could do the world's worst French accent and I can stream it to 500,000 people like I ever would, but I could do that and no one would bat an eye.
Yeah. I am more comfortable doing accents from countries that have large majority white populations. For some reason, I don't shy away from doing Scottish accents or Irish accents or Eastern European accents. An accent that is stereotypical for character or comedy reasons, if you are fitting it into one kind of person that has the potential to do more damage than if it is representative of a large variety of people. So for example, the people in Mudlark traditionally have Southern US accents. There are stupid people in Mudlark. There are smart people in Mudlark. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not just like, I got a big old mass full of dumb people and they all sound like this. That's more of a shaky foundation.
Yeah, I think a good thing to think about is if people have ever used an accent to mock or be like racist, essentially, it's like maybe you should probably stay away from that.
It's a power dynamics thing, right? It's like if it's ever been used as a weapon, it's like you should think twice about it.
We had another guest come on, Katie May, who we're talking about, especially in comedy, right? Where it's like the kind of jokes you want to make shouldn't be basically punching down. Instead, you should be punching up when you can. And it sounds like you do that with your accent choices.
I think it's really interesting, the tactic you introduce where, welcome to this region. Everyone you meet, no matter where they are in the world, will sound like this. When you talk to the gang leader who is orchestrating all of the events in Mudlark, he's going to sound exactly the same as the guy who's selling you half a fish out of a cart, you know?
Totally. So the players also like my character voices, which I think directs a lot of how characters end up sounding. For example, when we got to one town and my question to them was, what accent haven't I done yet? And the answer was Scottish. And then I was like, okay, everybody in this little village has a Scottish accent and it doesn't matter who they are, they sound like this. Like anything in Spout lore, it just comes from a place of trying to make my players laugh. I either want to make my players laugh or cry. That's my only goal, is to make them laugh, cry, or feel cool. That's it. I think that kind of codifies like how I think a GM should come to a game. If you want, like, you should be trying to make your players laugh, cry, or feel cool, and everything else is just kind of icing.
Obviously, listening to your show, I've heard your characters rib on you hard sometimes. To the point where I'm like, whew, I don't know if I could have handled that if I was on the other end of that. And a lot of times it seems very good-natured. Has it ever been too much?
That's a good question, because everybody that I play this game with, I've known for a really long time, and I trust and love very deeply. And there is a large degree to which I am playing the role of the put-upon game master. As much as they are exaggerating their actions for comedic purposes, I'm exaggerating my reactions for comedy purposes a lot of the time. It all comes down to how we've figured out our production schedule, funnily enough. We got to a point where we realized if we are recording really late at night, considering nothing in the show is planned until it is said, sometimes not everybody's on board. Like, there have been a few instances where it's like literally 3 a.m. and everybody's tired because we've been recording for 9 hours that day. You know, you're just trying to chug along to the end of a session. And so people just, you know, they're tired, and if it doesn't work for them, they get confused. And if they get confused, it's less fun. And that's when choices get harder to agree with, I guess. So that's really the only thing that we've run into, is people just being tired. We decided a long time ago that we would only record until like maybe 10 p.m. at the latest. But for the most part, nobody in the show ever genuinely wants to make anybody else feel bad, because we just love and care about each other. So if it ever gets to a point where someone feels like that, which it hasn't really, we just stop, take stock of what's going on, and make sure that everybody's cool before we move forward. I'm trying to think if there's been a time where I have felt like they're bullying me. Yeah, I don't think so. Like, and if they have, it has always ended up being, this sounds so weird, but if they've ever actually tried to bully me, it's always ended up funny enough that it was worth it.
It's like a stuntman thing. It's like if somebody gets injured during a stunt, we're going to use it.
Yeah, exactly. The Crystal Bay Customs House section is, in our minds, a classic example where I described something that was just too ugly for Jessica to want to think about. And she was like, no, that's ugly. I'm making a new thing. And it just became a thing that she was doing. And at first I was like, okay, all right, no, we'll just do something else. But it became this thing where she was now directing the show, and it was too funny to want to stop.
That was legitimately the scene that I was thinking about, where I was like, oh man, as a GM, if I started to describe something in my mind and then another player was like, no, and they just started like poo-pooing my creation, I'd been like, but guys, no, this is my beautiful my beautiful customs house that I made up.
I guess it makes it easier to let things roll off you when that happens, when you go in with, I have just the seed and we'll see where it goes from here, versus I have created this beautiful, chiseled sculpture for you to explore and examine.
Mm-hmm. There have been very few ideas in the show that I have been married to enough that I would fight them being changed for the player's enjoyment. You know what I mean? Like, as much as a session is not planned, the overall story of the show has not really ever been planned. So like, if a thing totally goes left, or if there's a situation that I'd really thought they were going to go and they don't go, it's not like I'm throwing a stack of papers in the garbage. And in the Crystal Bay Customs House situation, if it was anybody other than the three people sitting at that table, including my wife, a woman that I've known and loved for decades, then I probably would have been a lot angrier. But since it was three people that I love very deeply, I was like, oh, this is all jokes. They would never actually want to hurt me. So we're all just having fun.
The table matters, and who's at the table, totally, if you feel safe with it.
Yeah, totally. I don't play many games with people that I don't know, and I don't know how people do.
Playing with somebody for so long, you can kind of know, if I put this in front of them, they're going to enjoy this. And you kind of understand that chemistry. And I think for me as a GM, improv has been a thing I've been working on a lot, because I want to be able to learn to let go. So your comedy background, let's talk about that and how it relates to RPGs. What kind of comedy do you do? I know you do ghost tours. Your comedy ghost tours
Yes,
in Vancouver, which I would love to go to.
I've been performing in a variety of forms for a really long time. When I was in elementary school, I joined a program called PACE. It's the Program for Academic and Creative Enrichment in my school district, which was, they get kids from kindergarten to grade 12, and you put on between 3 and 4 seasonal musical theater shows, but musical theater in the sense that it is actually just songs and dances to disconnected pieces of music that are threaded together with a very vague theme. And they're like 3.5 hours long, and it's insane.
It sounds like a drug-induced dream.
That's funny that, Amber, that's your reaction, and mine is like, Spoutler's making a lot of sense to me right now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so Jessica and I did that together when we were in school, and it was an incredibly formative experience for me from a performance standpoint, because I started with zero experience telling jokes. In pace, in between songs, there are things called dialogue. We called them I don't know why I'm telling you the ins and outs of this musical theater program, but basically in between songs, they had kids that would tell jokes of some kind that were related or not related to the show, and not related or not related to the pieces of music. They were very often terrible, really awful jokes, like street joke level garbage that you're giving to children who have no idea what timing means. They can't enunciate. They can't work their way through a sentence.
Are there videotapes of this somewhere?
I've got years of DVDs. Jessica has a stack of them.
God.
Because it was something that we really enjoyed doing, as dumb as it ended up being in hindsight. But that's where I started telling jokes, was this musical theater program, because they realized that I couldn't dance at all, and I could very rarely sing properly. So a friend of mine and I ended up kind of being formed into this like comedy duo where we did a lot of those jokes often together. And we eventually got like watching some of the videos, we got arrogant enough to believe that we could rewrite the jokes and perform them on our own terms. So that was the first time that I ever had experience writing a joke, coming up with my own joke, telling it, getting a laugh, and being like, oh, this feels amazing. So from there, I joined improv. I did like competitive improv in high school.
Like improv battles?
I was not good at it.
What is that like?
Oh, I guess. So Canada's small enough that it would only make sense in Canada. We have like 10% of the population of the United States. But there's this thing called the Canadian Improv Games, which is like teams from high schools across the country compete and get to like, it ends up like a national competition where you have 10 teams and they all compete from across the country.
We have stupid spelling bees.
Exactly. I guess it is kind of the same deal. The Canadian Improv Games were as close to a spelling bee as I ever got, but the team at my high school was bad enough that we maybe made it through to the second round once, but it was my first experience coming up with stuff off the top of my head. And that many, many years later, after almost a decade of having very low self-esteem and very low self-belief, was foisted into stand-up in 2012 by a friend of mine that I went to school with. And stand-up ended up being what I needed creatively at that time in my life, and was a really good experience for writing jokes, altering jokes in the moment, pulling different things from like your experience or the show, like while you're talking. And then I met Abdul, and then Abdul and I started performing together. We do a stupid show called Fake Ghost Tours, where we do written and improvised material walking around outside like a legitimate ghost tour, but it's all trash. Like, it's just, I totally understand that my style of GMing might not be typical, because so much of my life has involved improvising for entertainment purposes. So yeah, it's the unfortunate answer to how does this factor into how I run games is I've been doing it since I was like 7 years old. Just like,
you know, I've only been jamming for 3 years, and you are one of my GM influences, Shawn. I'm serious. Because when I first listened to your show, it was different than most actual plays that I hear. It felt so natural and fluid, this give and take. And I was like, how in the world can I... Well, I guess I should go back into time, go to Canada, and get involved in pace, apparently, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, exactly. Go to Ruth King Elementary School in 1998 in Langford, British Columbia, and then you can start doing this. Improv is really hard, but the secret is genuinely that anybody can do it. But what stops people most of the time is confidence. And that's part of like why playing with the people that I play with is such a huge part of it, because I feel confident in my choice to just follow my instincts. Because if I had one piece of advice in terms of improv, it is just simply, unfortunately, like, follow your instincts. Whatever your first thought is, it might not be your best thought, but it's going to be like the beginning of your best thought. Don't stop yourself.
But yeah, I think that's a good tip. It's like I've been learning to just let go. Like, the more aware that I become, I usually get worse. But going back to what you said earlier, making your players laugh, making them feel cool, if I then take the emphasis off of me and just on them, I tend to like not stop myself. I'm more free and more open to just go with it. Because we're all already sitting around a table pretending to be elves, so...
We've all already made this choice to talk about dumb, fake stuff, but it's because we enjoy it and we enjoy each other's company. And I mean, I understand that's not everybody's table situation. Maybe you only play it at the game store, your local game store, because that's the only option that you have. And it's random people that you don't know and maybe don't like. And in that situation, like, you can't, there's like, if you don't feel comfortable improving around people and just letting your mind loosen, which is the way I think about it. Like, You know when you try and look at a magic eye and you have to like loosen your eyeballs? It's like that, but for your brain is the only way that I can describe it.
No, I know what you're talking about. I think of it that way with stupid video games. In high school, I remember playing, it's a stupid helicopter game. You literally just click a button and the helicopter goes up. You let it go, it falls down. You're just trying to dodge. The way you get good at this game is you just stop looking at the screen, really. Like, when you relax and just, like, become part of the surroundings, that is when you are going to be in the zone. That's kind of the same way, where it's like, I am just here with people I like. That's good enough.
The three of us are improving right now. You know what I mean? Like, we improv our way through basically every single interaction that we have in our lives. So, like, gaming really isn't that different if you just break it down to its basis, is you're having a conversation. And that's part of the reason that I gravitate towards the games that I gravitate towards too, because if rules get in the way of that conversation, then everything has a potential to hitch up.
I have something I want to share with you, Shawn, that was relating to that. Like, everyday situations are just improv, where I've recently noticed every interaction I have with anybody out in the real world feels like an NPC quest interaction. Where it's like, you go to the store, this old lady comes and she goes, "Oh, you look so nice. Could you get me this rice-a-roni on the top shelf?" And I'm like, "Oh, yes, here you go." She goes, "Oh, thank you. This used to be something my grandson ate every Sunday when he came over, but he no longer comes over anymore." And I'm like, "Oh, that's really nice." And then pretty soon you're like in her house eating rice-a-roni with her.
That's life, man. That's life. You got to just loosen your brain. Let the world push you where you're going.
Go to a grandma's house and eat rice-a-roni.
Exactly. That's a great little crystal of GM advice, is eat the rice-a-roni, you know, like just go for it. Yeah. I mean, that's the long and short of it. The rice-a-roni thing specifically is the long and short of what I'm trying to say. Yeah. Just realize that you're talking to your friends.
Yeah. So I usually have a sort of list of questions I use as a guideline for these interviews, and I happen to notice that there's a notation for Warhammer 40K on here. I'm guessing Kenny put it there.
Yeah, Kenny and I were talking about, I was reading a book. I can't even remember what it's called anymore because it started off so interesting and then it became really stupid, and I was like, I can't, not right now.
Yeah, I got obsessed very briefly with Warhammer because of Astartes, which is an amazing short YouTube series made by one dude.
Yeah.
And like, that is just like, even if you're a GM, just watch that for some just great, brilliant, quick storytelling, awesome set pieces, just like cool stuff that you can draw inspiration from. Go check it out. But I watched that, and then I immediately started diving into 40K wikis and just the chaos, literally the chaos that you find as you dive in there. It's very interesting for a lot of different reasons.
I don't know how anybody takes Warhammer seriously in any fashion. And if they do, that worries me in a sense. I mean, like, it's basically just space Catholicism, which is a very interesting kernel to start with. What if Catholics colonize space?
No, it's a great place to start.
And the book that I was reading, that you and I were talking about, it starts off with Space Marine, which is, Space Marines are dumb as hell. It's the stupidest idea. It's basically just like a 14-year-old sketchbook writ large. But it starts off with this Space Marine questioning his place in this empire, where he's like, am I just a weapon? These people had a culture, and we're saying that our culture is better than their culture. But is it? And why do we get to decide that? And I was like, what? That's what these books are about? And then literally like a couple chapters after that, it was like, there are aliens in the grass and the grass is sharp. And I was like, what?
That is my total experience reading anything 40K, is like, I'm like, wow. And then literally 10 seconds later, what? Like, the whole idea of the Emperor, I was so enamored with. I was like, they don't even know who this person was, who is the foundation of their whole culture. He's a corpse on a throne. In my mind, when I was first reading about it, I was like, he probably had no idea where this was all going. He probably didn't approve of any of this. They venerate him, but he was... And then if you go and read the Emperor's backlog, he was like a psychic child from 10,000 BC. Like, it's the worst.
Yeah, they feed him 10,000 psychics a day to keep him alive. It's like, what? Even logistically, where are you getting 10,000 psychics every day?
So yeah, it's trash, but I love it. I'm not knocking it. I enjoy this trash. It's great inspiration.
Absolutely. I don't know about you all, but my obsession, and I do, if I were being honest with myself, I would classify it as an obsession with role-playing games, has led me to look at almost every piece of media through the lens of, would this be a cool game?
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
Like your example of the Astartes short story. I have no interest in playing a Warhammer game, but I'm like, okay, from like an encounter perspective, this is really cool because you've got these different areas of elevation. You've got this vastly overwhelmed force, but there are three people and they're much more powerful than everybody else that's here. There's obscured vision. There's robots everywhere. And I have done that with like Pride and Prejudice. I've done that with like Gilmore Girls. It's inspirations everywhere. The muse strikes you at the strangest of times.
It's Ratatouille. Has been a big inspiration of mine.
Okay, actually, this is a question that I want to ask you guys, and I am also going to think of my answer. But what is the weirdest piece of media that has made you think of the weirdest potential game?
I have an answer. I don't know if this is the weirdest, but I literally have a document about making this game. So I've been binging Star Trek Next Generation during quarantine. I'm almost done with it. And watching it, I just got really interested in the constant standoffs between the Federation and the Romulan Empire. And now they're like, there's the neutral zone and there's this little back and forth. And I was like, there is a role-playing game there where you have this super tense situation that you're trying to resolve where both players are making these moves not to cross the neutral zone or to bait the other person to crossing the neutral zone. Some kind of weird battleship-style role-playing game there that is just brewing still.
Yeah, that would be really cool. I've always thought that it would be really interesting to play a Star Trek game, but focus on the Enterprise style, like political, philosophical debate side of it. Because, you know, phasers are fun, but the amount of things that Picard solves by like yelling about morality is like, I'd love to do that.
So for me, I think a lot of my TTRPG inspiration, I haven't thought about making a game, like a game system itself or anything like that, but like for scenarios specifically, a lot of the time it's usually a piece of art or sculpture or some sort of photography that I find that usually makes me go, oh, that's cool. What if that existed in this scenario? What if my players find that? And so back when Tumblr was a thing and people actually were on Tumblr, I used to have a tag that I would put inspiration on. Like I would reblog stuff and put inspiration. So I have actually on my Tumblr a whole bunch of stuff. So there's a game called A Scoundrel in the Deep. Have you ever heard of it? Anybody? So
No.
A Scoundrel in the Deep is a 2-player game. Somebody's a scoundrel and somebody's the deep. And you have matches are your mechanic. The scoundrel strikes the match and they have as long as the match is lit to ask questions about what's around them. And then the deep, the GM, the other player gets to do like moves and stuff. I always suggest it as like a really good world building and also how to describe stuff other than using sight. So if you want to get better at describing smell and sounds and feel and that kind of stuff, that's a really good tool. But I remember I just used a bunch of stuff from my Tumblr inspiration tag to put together a whole scenario for that, a whole like deep. And like there was one like little statues that look like the Princess Mononoke tree spirit stuff.
Like,
yeah, the knocking heads.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of stuff where I get stuff. So it's not the weirdest piece of, but it's more like I just find stuff and then I like a rat stick it in my mind nest.
That's really cool. Yeah, because I realized that I presented this question and now I can't think of an answer.
That's all right. You asked it. You interviewed us.
As I've gotten older, I mean, I still like action to a large degree. I like action movies. I like scoundrels with guns committing crimes and getting away. Like that's still cool. But as I've gotten older, I've realized that I have less interest in fighting and killing in media than I do in like talking and learning. That's why I liked your Ryutama games so much, because I like that the focus in those games is on the exploration and the characters, and that is the game, as opposed to like Dungeons and Dragons, which whatever, big ups to the progenitors, whatever, honor the ancestors. But like, it really is basically like find the road that will lead us to the next thing that we kill. And like, that's boring to me. I have tried to write so many games and have given up out of frustration or lack of self-confidence. But the one that I tried to make, which should have been easy, was a hack of Lasers and Feelings called Sense and Sensibility, because I just wanted a game to just play out social situations, intrigue that is based solely upon how you feel, as opposed to like goals you're trying to accomplish. Besides that, like, I was trying to think of a game. It was based on a tweet that somebody made, but a game that was Blades in the Dark, but just about the animals in an abandoned pet store.
Oh, that'd be fun.
Solely because I came up with the stupid pun name Clades in the Dark. Yeah. If you don't know what a clade is, look it up. It's the perfect name. It's the perfect name for something. So I guess that's probably the worst that I've wanted to play, is like a crew-based crime game that's just about animals in a pet store.
I think you win that contest.
You know what? I just realized I did make a game. It was a hack of Honey Heist.
Yeah.
It was a Goblin Grub. You had either Goblin or Business as your stat. I forgot about that.
Goblins running a food truck.
Yeah, and that came from a fever dream.
That's a great idea. Actually, I made a game for the Sad Mech Game Jam that was about a year ago. Didn't tell anybody about it.
I have it.
You're the person that bought the game that I made? Oh my God. Because literally only one person bought it. So if it wasn't you.
I'm pretty sure I bought it.
How did you find it?
I think you had to have tweeted about it. Because like.
There's no way. Oh, I think I did. I think I must have.
Let me look.
But yeah, it was called The Debrief. One player is a mech pilot and the other is a counselor. And they just talk through the mission that the pilot was just on and try and come to some sort of emotional revelation by the end of it. Never played it, didn't play test it at all. Don't even know if it's a game. But that's the beauty of the indie RPG scene, is basically anything is a game.
It's an experience.
Guess what I have? The Debrief
What?
For the Emotional Mecha Jam by Shawn O'Hara.
I can't believe you're the person that bought it. That's hilarious. That has been a mystery to me for years.
Because I liked the aspect of it. I've always thought about stuff, like even with like the Next Generation, Star Trek, it's like the things that people go through in these space dramas are horrible. That's so funny that I have that. But speaking of the exact opposite of horrible, this chat has been great. Thank you.
But thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun. Yeah, this was great.
If people want to find you on the internet or find the things you do, where could they do that?
So you can find me on Twitter at Shawn, SHAWN _O'Hara. I'll let you figure that name out. And you can find a show that Abdul and I do with some other very funny friends of ours called Make It Funny on YouTube. Make It Funny with a Filthy Lot Entertainment. It's fun. Check it out. You can find Spoutlore at www.spoutlore.com or hotmeatboys.com.
It's a long story.
You can find through the Spoutlore stuff. You can find pretty much all of our other social media crap.
Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the show. Our theme music was provided by the Battle Bards. You can find me on Twitter at Rocket Orca, Kenny as at Wolfmere, and John is at Crossways GM. Tabletop Babble is part of the Geekspective Network. Go to geekspective.com to check out all our other shows or follow us on Twitter at Geekspective. Hero Forge offers fully customizable tabletop miniatures with dozens of fantasy races and thousands of parts to choose from. Their easy-to-use design tool lets you build your perfect miniature online using a fully 3D, in-depth character creator right in your web browser. Custom minis can be made in a variety of materials, including plastic and metal options. They also offer downloadable model files so you can 3D print your own unique designs at home. Hero Forge is constantly expanding their catalog of customization options, adding new parts every week and major features like races and custom posing on a regular basis. Visit heroforge.com to start designing your custom miniature today. And check back often, new content is added every week.